Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm enjoying your state very much, particularly the climate. If you can't appreciate that, come to Mississippi and see me in August, and you'll really understand heat and humidity. I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors on this project. I'm working with Rick Standiford down at Berkeley and Sam Evans, also there at UC Berkeley. So we're looking at the contribution that manufacturing, timber harvesting has to the North Coast counties. So that's a question you may get from time to time. How important is timber harvesting and manufacturing to your economy? Well, that's a really powerful piece of information, particularly when you're talking to policymakers, government officials. And the tool of economic contribution analysis, and this is something we use quite extensively in the South, can quantify the contribution value of forestry, timber harvesting, manufacturing in terms of metrics that are readily understandable by policymakers and government officials: jobs, income, value added, which is new wealth, and output, which is sales. So the focus of this analysis, we're going to be looking at this region in the four-county region, North Coast counties, mostly redwood, Doug fir forest, and predominantly the ownership is private lands that are productive. So again, we'll be looking at Del Norte, Humboldt, Mendocino, and Sonoma counties. For the purpose of this analysis, we looked at those four counties combined, and we also looked at them individually. So a little outline here of what I'll talk about. I want to expose you to this concept of economic contribution analysis, which is a feature of input-output modeling, give you a little background on how that tool works, some of the key elements and metrics of in-plan software, which is the key software tool for doing this kind of work, and then we'll go into the results and a little bit of a discussion. So, how important is one sector to a regional economy? In this case, we'll look at the forest products manufacturing sector. Is the importance, economic importance of that sector just its own production, the jobs in that sector? Well, obviously not. But that is what we would call the direct effect, and that's the beginning. So the direct effect then will be the forest product sectors, manufacturing. Does the sector purchase goods and services from within the economy? Well, certainly it does. Some things are purchased outside of the economy, but a lot of things are purchased here. And that's what we call an indirect effect. If we can capture that, that helps communicate the economic value of manufacturing to this economy. Now, that's just one part. The next part is the spending of employees. Those who work in the forest product sector, manufacturing, forest products manufacturing and harvesting, they buy inputs from local services here in your economy. They have employees. They go to the grocery store. They buy gasoline. They buy other services. When you sum all those together, we get what we call a total effect. And that's the goal of this particular analysis. So if you look at the graphic here on the bottom, this will help explain a little bit better. The direct effect is the value of forestry and forest products manufacturing, sales, jobs. They purchase inputs from supporting sectors in the local economy. That's the indirect effect. The employees of both buy and spend in the local economy, go to restaurants, etc. That's induced effect. By summing all that together, you get a total effect, and that's a much more powerful way of communicating the value of forestry and forest products to policymakers, government officials, and the public. So, again, to summarize, we're looking at the gross change in a region's existing economy that can be attributed to forestry and forest products manufacturing and how that economic activity cycles. And the way we quantify that, we use a tool called input-output analysis. And a specific application of that is to look at the value of one sector or group of sectors to the economy. Input-output models has an extensive history. It first came out in the 1930s by a Nobel-winning economist. Creates an IO framework that looks at all sectors of the economy, all aspects of the economy, how they buy, purchase goods and services from each other. So if you remove one sector of the economy, you can see how that would trickle through the rest of the economy. The framework basically looks at final demands and final payments of any one sector on other sectors, and we can also include payments for inputs made outside of that particular sector, looking at wages and services provided by households, particularly labor. Now here's one of the key aspects of this, multipliers. You'll often hear economic developers talk about the multiplier effect of an industry. Now that's looking at backward linkages only. So I'll use the example of a sawmill. A sawmill's backward linkages then are the purchase of labor from people within the economy. They purchase electricity, for example, from the local utility, and they're purchasing logs from landowners, among many things that they're purchasing. We toured the sawmill yesterday, Humboldt Redwood, and you saw all kinds of inputs, banding material, earplugs, lots of different inputs in that production process. Now, some items are purchased outside of the local economy. That's what we would call a leakage. That reduces the multiplier effect. Some of you guys may recognize this text. If you have a forestry training, you took a class on forest economics and finance, Kempler's text. The last chapter in that particular text, after you got past LED models and everything else, was a section on input-output analysis. And it's talking about that concept of leakage here, is what I'm trying to demonstrate with this graphic. Now, the more developed an economy is, the more service sectors it has, it can capture more of this leakage. The less developed an economy is, the smaller it is, the leakage will be greater. Now, to conduct this analysis, use a tool called Implant software for input-output modeling. This is a screenshot of the user interface, and the key point I want to make here is all sectors of the economy are summarized into one of 536 sectors. So this is pulling information from federal sources, from the North American Industrial Classification System, and aggregating it down to 536 sectors. Now, within those 536 sectors, these are the ones for the North Coast counties that I've identified as forestry or forestry related that I will consider to be the direct effect. And I can sum them here as 4 groups: forestry and logging, wood biomass, solid wood products, and what we'll call is wood furniture. And in this table here on the right, you can see the respective sectors and how they correspond to the federal NAICS code. So we have everything from commercial logging, biomass power generation, sawmills, wood preservation, custom architectural woodwork and millwork, basically molding. All of these different aspects we would consider to be the direct effect for forestry and forest products manufacturing. Now, for reporting purposes, and I'll show you some figures in a moment, the rest of the North Coast county's economy, I would aggregate into one of these respective categories. So everything is represented except the shadow economy that everyone wants to hear about in the next couple of presentations. So, let me move forward then. The key metrics we're going to look at here in terms of the results that I'm going to show you in a moment: employment, so we're looking at the number of full and part-time jobs; employee compensation, the amount of wages and salaries; output, which is the total value of production or sales; and then value added, which is essentially the total output minus the cost of purchased input. So that's the creation of new wealth. All right, let's look at the results. Now these are just the direct effects. I'm showing for the 4 North Coast counties combined are 4 metrics here of employment, labor income, output, and value added for each of the 4 groups of the forest product sectors. Well, which one stands out as the largest in terms of all measures? It's solid wood manufacturing. That's where the largest amount of employment is, labor income, value added, and output. No surprise there. Woody biomass is the smallest, with just that one cogen facility here in Humboldt County. And then forestry and logging. So as you look at this, you can see the importance of having that value-added manufacturing component of solid wood products. in terms of generating economic activity here in the North Coast counties. Now let's look at each of these 4 metrics by county. Which one stands out to you here in terms of employment and labor income? And it should be no surprise, Humboldt County. And which is the largest employer of the 4 forest products groupings, forestry sector groupings? That would be solid wood, about 824 direct jobs. Forestry and logging is next. So it's huge in Humboldt, Mendocino and Sonoma, and Del Norte's obviously the smallest of the 4. One small solid wood product facility there. And in terms of the value of the forestry and logging sector, that should be no surprise. When we were looking at Aaron Kelly's presentation earlier, you could see that private land was a really small proportion there to federal land as compared to the other 4 North Coast counties. And in terms of production, again, these are just the direct effects. The values, again, are the largest for Humboldt, and solid wood products dominates that. The spike there in value added for wood biomass, trying to understand that, and I would attribute that to the fact that that's a subsidy. There's a subsidy that goes to woody biomass. Now, we just looked at the direct effects. So we shocked the model with those direct effects, and let's look at how it multiplies through the economy. So the result of the direct effects creates an indirect effect and an induced effect, which I have there in blue. So because we have 1,719 forest products jobs in Humboldt County, that generates another 3,320 jobs in that particular county. You would notice that in Mendocino counties, Mendocino and Sonoma County, there is a multiplier effect, but it's not quite as strong. So, for example, Mendocino is 973 jobs, but the indirect induced effect is just an additional 1,203 jobs. Where are those jobs occurring? The other businesses in the county economies that provide inputs to the logging companies, the solid wood products companies. And the employees of both go to restaurants, purchase groceries, etc., and use other service sectors, and that generates the induced effect. Similar effect we see with labor income. And again, looking at output and value added, again, no surprise, Humboldt is the largest, and Del Norte is the smallest in terms of the direct and the indirect and induced effects. Perhaps a more meaningful way to look at this would be looking at employment and labor income by county as a percentage of the total county economy. So when we look at the sum of the direct, indirect, and induced effects of forest products manufacturing, it's making up about 4.4% of Mendocino's economy in terms of jobs. And Humboldt is accounting for about 7.4%. Now clearly, 10 years, 20 years ago, these numbers would have been higher. Kind of shocking when you look at Del Norte and what percentage of the economy it comprises there. And that's a reflection of the fact that that county economy is less diverse compared to even Humboldt and certainly Sonoma and Mendocino counties. We see a similar result when we look at the labor income effect. So nearly 6% of all the labor income in Mendocino County is tied back to the forestry and forest products manufacturing sector. About nearly 4% in Mendocino County, and certainly much smaller in Del Norte, and only 0.5% in Sonoma. Of course, Sonoma's county economy is quite diverse and large compared to the other 4 North Coast counties, so that's not a surprise either. We see a similar result when we look at output. So nearly 8% of all of the total value of sales in Humboldt County are tied back to the fact that you can harvest and transport timber and manufacture into products in Humboldt County. It's a much smaller effect in Del Norte. We see that similar trend also in the value-added component. Now, what sectors of the economy are benefiting Now we're looking here at Humboldt County. So this is the indirect and induced effects that result from forestry and forest products manufacturing. What sectors benefit the most? Well, we see the government sector benefits substantially. Real estate and rental. So that's obviously the employees of the the direct and indirect purchasing homes and rental property. Retail trade, no surprise there, and health and social services. All of those sectors benefit substantially from the forest products industry. That's Humboldt County. Mendocino, we see that real estate and rental there stands out strongly as also with government. And when we look at Sonoma County, again, a huge effect there for real estate and rental, and to some degree professional technical services. That's accounting, legal services, etc. And then for Del Norte, relatively small impact in that particular county, but we see sectors like agriculture and health and social services benefiting the most. That two-digit NAICS agriculture includes a sector called support services for forestry and agriculture. So they're benefiting from timber harvesting there in Del Norte County. Now the multiplier effect, as I begin to finish up, this is the number that you'll hear economic developers use quite a bit. Look at Humboldt County. It says 2.9 for employment. How do we interpret that number, 2.9? So for each one job in the forest product sector, Humboldt County benefits with another 1.9. Oh, so for each 10 jobs in the forest product sector, there's another 19 jobs in the rest of this county's economy because of the forest product sector. So a really strong multiplier effect for employment, labor income, same trend for output and value added. And it's a much lower multiplier when you look at Del Norte. Again, it's a much smaller economy. But when you look at Mendocino and Sonoma, those multiplier values are 2.2 and 2.3. Why is that? It's a much more diverse economy, many more opportunities to capture leakage. Del Norte, it's a much smaller economy. There's a lot of leakage there. A lot of products are trucked into Del Norte County. And a very high multiplier in Humboldt County. And that makes sense because over time, a lot of businesses here have adapted to provide services to forestry, logging, and solid wood products. And that's why that multiplier is strong. So we can see that the contribution effect differs greatly across the 4 North Coast counties, reflecting the intensity of the forest products industry in Humboldt, the much smaller economy in Del Norte. And we looked at the multiplier values, and that indicates how the economy responds to that spending. So a really strong multiplier value there for Humboldt County, 2.9. So to summarize Del Norte's direct effect, just the value of the forestry and forest products manufacturing sector, just $3.6 million in sales, a very small multiplier of 1.5. You compare that with Humboldt, the direct effect is $429 million and a much higher output multiplier. So in Del Norte County, it's just a $9 million industry. In Humboldt County, it's a $657 million industry. Again, just reflecting the size of the forest products manufacturing sector here compared to Del Norte, and the size of the Humboldt economy compared to Del Norte. So, as you would expect, a larger economy is a more diverse economy. It can capture more of the leakages. That's why we're seeing a larger multiplier value for Humboldt and Sonoma and Mendocino, not so much for Del Norte. Okay. We see that the magnitude of that contribution differs, again, with the size of the forest products industry, no surprise there. And we can see how forestry does provide numerous economic benefits to local economies. Particularly Humboldt really stands out. And obviously, it's necessary to do periodic assessments of these kinds of economic contribution analysis because the amount of harvesting changes over time. It dropped sharply with the recession. It's starting to come back now. The forest product sector is expanding. We've seen plans where Humboldt Redwood is going to expand its kiln production capacity. So we need to revisit this probably in the next few years to see how the contribution presumably will expand. All right. And with that, I'll take your questions, but that's the summary for the North Coast forest products industry. We could describe it as a $1.57 billion industry to the 4 North Coast counties, accounting for about 2.5% of all the jobs in this region. So, any questions?
James, thank you. We're going to have to hold those for next. We're going to have to move on.
All right.
Please try and get those again if you have questions. That's it.